Okay, so I know you're out there looking to really boost your English listening comprehension.
And we've got something exciting to share, some tips that I think you'll find pretty helpful.
Yeah, we recently came across this podcast episode that was all about strategies for improving English listening. 15 of them, in fact.
It was packed with so much good stuff that we thought, you know what, let's break it down together, sort of pull out the best parts, really highlight what's most useful.
Yeah, and what struck us was how practical these tips are. Like, they're tailor-made for someone who wants to get the most out of their learning, without having to spend hours and hours.
Totally. And the very first tip kind of jumps right into the heart of it.
It's all about making English listening a daily habit.
But here's the thing. It doesn't have to be this huge time commitment.
Right. Even just squeezing in 20 to 30 minutes a day can make a huge difference.
Yeah. Have you found that to be true in your experience? Oh, absolutely. It's like, building a muscle. You wouldn't expect to just run a marathon after one short jog, right?
That's a great analogy.
It's about consistency. The nice thing is you can easily fit these little listening sessions into your day, commute time, lunch break, even while you're doing the dishes.
It all adds up. That's such a good point.
And speaking of fitting it into your life, this episode really emphasized choosing stuff that you actually enjoy listening to.
Yeah.
Because when you're genuinely interested in what you're hearing, you're just naturally more engaged.
Yeah.
And you absorb so much more. I always think of it like the difference between forcing yourself to read a textbook versus getting lost in a good novel,
I totally get that. And that leads perfectly into the next tip, which, I'll be honest, it might seem counterintuitive at first.
It's all about starting slow and steady.
Because I know when I first started listening to, native English speakers, it felt like they were speaking a mile a minute.
Oh, yeah. That's a very common experience. It's like expecting a beginner swimmer to just dive straight into the ocean.
Yeah, it's overwhelming.
Totally. That's why they suggest things like BBC Learning English or TED Talks, those kinds of resources.
Yeah.
Because they often have options to adjust the playback speed. So you can start at a pace that feels comfortable and then gradually increase it as your ear gets used to, the natural flow of English.
That makes so much sense. It reminds me of scaffolding in learning, where you start with easier steps and then make things harder.
Exactly. It's about setting yourself up for success and not getting overwhelmed and giving up.
Right. And I think there are even resources that combine the audio with the text, like audiobooks that have their written versions paired.
Oh, yeah.
And that could be a good option for some people who like to see the words while they're hearing them.
It's like training wheels for your ears.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so we've talked about easing in and finding content you love. Now let's talk about a tool that can be really helpful, but sometimes gets a bad rap. Subtitles. What are your thoughts on using subtitles for English listening practice?
I think they can be a fantastic tool, but you got to use them strategically. Think of them as a temporary support, not something you rely on forever.
Okay, so how would you recommend using them effectively?
Well, one approach is to watch a movie or a show with the subtitles on first, and then challenge yourself to watch it again without them.
Ooh, that's a good challenge.
And see how much you can understand. Because it forces your brain to work a little harder.
Yeah. It's like taking those training wheels off once you've got some balance.
Exactly. And you can even wean yourself off subtitles gradually. Start with dual subtitles, like English plus your native language, then move to just English subs, and then finally try going without them completely.
That's giving me so many ideas. Okay, so speaking of tuning into spoken English, let's move on to active listening. What are your thoughts on active versus passive listening?
Okay, so passive listening is when you're letting the sound wash over you, but you're not really engaging with it. It's what happens when you have the radio on in the background while you're doing something else,
Right.
Active listening is different. It's about consciously paying attention to what you're hearing. It's like you're asking yourself questions, what are the main points? What's the speaker's trying to say?
So it's not just about hearing the words, it's about processing them, understanding what they mean.
Exactly. Imagine you're listening to a podcast and it's about something you're interested in. Instead of just letting the words go in one ear and out the other, you could jot down keywords or try to summarize what you've heard, even try to picture in your mind what the speaker is describing.
I like that. It's almost like you're having a conversation with the audio, not just passively listening.
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever tried shadowing?
Oh, many times.
What is it?
So basically, you find a short audio clip, 30 to 60 seconds from a movie, a song, or whatever,
Okay.
and you mimic everything the speaker says. The words, the tone, the pauses, everything. It's like you're trying to become their vocal double.
It's almost like you're an impressionist.
Exactly. It's a really fun way to practice.
So what are the benefits of doing that?
Well, first, it makes you listen super closely to every little detail.
Yeah, you can't zone out.
No, not at all. And then it helps you absorb those rhythms, the intonation, the pronunciation of English.
Okay.
And the third thing, it can actually help you speak more fluently and confidently because you're training your mouth to move in the same way as a native speaker.
Wow, I'm definitely adding shadowing to my list of things to try. It's amazing how such a simple technique can have such a big impact.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we've got making listening a habit, starting slow, using subtitles wisely, and those active listening strategies, including shadowing. We're really laying a good foundation here, don't you think?
I think so, yeah. And this next one is kind of building on that. Embrace the accent rainbow.
Yes, I love this one. It's so important to remember that English isn't just one thing. There are so many cool accents out there.
Right, and if you only listen to one or two accents, it can actually hold you back in the real world.
That's true.
Think about it. You might meet someone with an Australian accent, a Scottish accent, an Indian accent. So many possibilities.
So many. So how do we get better at understanding different accents? Should we actively search for different accents, or will it happen naturally as we listen more?
I think it's good to do a bit of both. It's great to actively look for podcasts or interviews from different English-speaking countries. But even if you don't do that consciously, the more you listen to real English content, the more you'll naturally come across different accents.
It's like you're training your ears to be more adaptable. Okay, so we've covered making listening a habit, starting slow and steady, embracing subtitles, active listening, shadowing, and all the beautiful accents out there.
Yep. Sounds like we've covered a lot of ground.
We have. So what's next on our list of tips for leveling up our English listening game?
Well, this next one might seem super obvious, but it's something that people often forget. Make podcasts and audiobooks your best friends.
I love this one. Podcasts and audiobooks are like treasure troves of language learning.
Totally. And you can find podcasts and audiobooks about literally any topic you can imagine.
It's true. So you can choose topics that you actually enjoy learning about, which makes all the difference. Are there any particular podcasts or audiobooks that you're enjoying right now?
Oh, so many. Let me think. I'm really into a podcast about true crime and another one about the history of philosophy.
Ooh, those sound interesting.
It's amazing how much I'm learning, but it doesn't even feel like work because I'm so into the content,
It's learning disguised as entertainment. And if you're looking for extra support, a lot of podcasts have transcripts.
Yes, transcripts can be so helpful. You can follow along, check your understanding, or look up words you don't know.
I'm a big fan of transcripts. They let you go at your own pace, pause, rewind. It's so helpful.
Definitely. Don't be afraid to try out different genres, formats, accents. It's all about expanding your horizons.
Okay, so podcasts and audiobooks are officially on our list. What else can we add to our toolkit?
Well, this next tip is a little more technical, but it's really important for understanding how native speakers actually talk. It's all about word linking and reductions.
Ooh, this is a good one. When I first started listening to native English speakers, it felt like they were swallowing half the words. It was so confusing.
Yeah, native speakers often blend words together or use shorter forms, which can make it sound like they're talking super fast. But once you get the hang of these patterns, it gets much easier to understand.
So it's like you're learning a secret code. And once you crack it, you can understand what they're saying.
Exactly. For example, you might hear gonna instead of going to, or wanna instead of want to. There are lots of examples like that.
Ah, that makes so much sense. It's like they're streamlining the language.
Yeah.
So how do we get better at understanding these patterns? Is it just by listening closely? Or are there resources that can help?
Listening closely is definitely key. You can try paying attention to how people talk in movies, TV shows, even in real-life conversations.
Soaking it all in.
Exactly. And there are some good resources online that can help break it down for you.
Okay, so we're becoming detectives of language. Speaking of testing our skills, the next tip is all about using listening tests and dictation exercises. What are your thoughts on those?
I think they can be really useful for figuring out where you're struggling and for tracking your progress. Have you ever tried them?
I have, but sometimes I find them a bit frustrating, especially when I don't do as well as I hoped. But I can see how they can help you pinpoint weaknesses.
Right. And they give you instant feedback. You can see exactly where you made mistakes, which helps guide your practice. There are lots of websites that offer these kinds of exercises, like BBC Learning English.
That's good to know. It's probably helpful to approach them with a growth mindset, you know?
Yeah.
Like, not beat yourself up if you make mistakes.
Absolutely. Mistakes are how we learn.
Exactly. So what's next on our list of super effective listening tips?
Well, this next one builds on shadowing, but it takes it a step further. It's about repeating and imitating entire conversations.
Oh, interesting. So instead of just mimicking individual words or phrases, you're mimicking whole chunks of dialogue.
Yep, exactly.
I've never tried that. It sounds fun. And I can imagine it would be really helpful for developing a more natural speaking style.
Absolutely. It's all about immersing yourself in the rhythms and patterns of spoken English. How would you suggest going about it?
Well, you could find a short clip of a real conversation from a movie, a TV show, a YouTube video, anything like that.
Okay.
And then listen to it carefully and try to repeat the sentences word for word. Pay attention to everything: tone, speed, pronunciation.
So it's like you're doing voiceover work for real-life conversations.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I'm adding this one to my list of things to try. So we've got shadowing and repeating conversations. What else can we do to boost our listening skills?
This next one is all about connecting with native speakers, particularly through language exchange platforms.
Oh yeah, like Tandem, HelloTalk, Speaky, those kinds of platforms.
Exactly. Have you ever used any of those?
I've dabbled in them a bit, but I'll admit I sometimes feel a bit nervous about talking to native speakers.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Like, I feel like my English isn't good enough. But I know how valuable it would be to have those real conversations and get feedback.
Well, remember, everyone on those platforms is there to learn and improve. They were beginners once, too. And the great thing about language exchange is that it's a two-way street. You're helping someone else learn your language while they're helping you.
That's a great point. And it would be so cool to connect with people from other cultures and learn about their perspectives.
Absolutely. It's a fantastic way to expand your horizons.
Okay, so language exchange is officially on my list of things to explore. What's next on our journey to English listening mastery?
Well, let's not forget about the power of entertainment. The next tip is all about making English movies and TV shows your new best friends.
I love this one. Movies and TV shows are such a fun way to immerse yourself in the language, and there's literally something for everyone.
Exactly. And they're great for learning natural, everyday language.
Do you have any favorite movies or TV shows that you'd recommend?
For beginners, I often recommend sitcoms like Friends or The Office.
Oh yeah, those are classics.
They usually have clear dialogue, and the stories are easy to follow.
And then as you improve, you can explore other genres like dramas, documentaries, even reality TV. It's all about finding what you enjoy.
And don't be afraid to challenge yourself by watching without subtitles. Or try watching with English subtitles instead of your native language.
That's a good challenge. It's
All
like,
right.
okay, time to take off those training wheels again. So movies and TV shows are officially on our list of English listening super tools. What else can we add to our arsenal?
Well, let's not forget about the power of music. It's such a universal language, and it can be a really effective tool for connecting with English.
I love this one. Music has a way of getting past our conscious mind and just connecting with us emotionally. It can be really powerful.
And it's so accessible. You can listen to music anytime, anywhere.
Absolutely. Do you have any tips for using music to improve our English listening?
Well, one helpful thing to do is listen to songs while you're reading the lyrics.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
That way, you can follow along and see the words as you hear them. It can help you identify new words and even practice singing along. It's a fun way to work on your pronunciation and vocabulary.
I love that. It's like a built-in karaoke session for language learning.
Yeah.
And singing along can help you really internalize the sounds and rhythms of the language. Okay, so we've got music on our list of must-try strategies. What else can we do to supercharge our English listening?
This next tip is really important, but it's often overlooked. Patience and practice are your allies in this journey.
This is such a good reminder. It's easy to get caught up in wanting to see results quickly,
Yeah,
but learning a language takes time.
exactly. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And it's important to be kind to yourself along the way. There will be days when you feel like you're making great progress and days when you feel stuck.
Oh, definitely. It's like learning any new skill. There will be ups and downs. The key is to keep practicing and not give up.
Absolutely. And even those small, consistent efforts will add up to big results in the long run.
So small steps, consistency, and patience are key.
Absolutely. And that leads us to our final tip for today. Set goals for success. Goals are like a roadmap. They help us stay focused and motivated. But when it comes to something as big as improving your English listening, it can be tough to know where to start.
I agree. Setting goals can be tricky. Do you have any advice for setting effective goals in this area?
Well, the first step is to identify your why. Why is improving your English listening skills important to you? What do you hope to achieve by reaching that goal? Do you want to travel? Do you want to make new friends? Do you want to advance your career? Whatever your reason, keep it in mind.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's like setting out on a journey. You need to know your destination before you can plan your route.
Yeah.
But how do we make sure those goals are actually achievable?
That's where SMART goals come in. SMART goals are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So instead of just saying, I want to improve my English listening, you might set a goal like, I want to be able to understand 80% of an English language movie without subtitles within 6 months.
I love that. So break down those big goals into smaller, more manageable steps. It makes it feel less daunting.
Exactly. It's like climbing a mountain. You don't try to reach the summit in one giant leap.
Yeah.
You take it one step at a time.
And it's important to celebrate those small wins along the way. It keeps us motivated. Well, we've covered so much ground today.
We have. It's been a really interesting discussion.
And we've got so many practical tips to take away. So tell me, what's the one thing you're going to try first to level up your English listening game?
You know, it's interesting as we're going through these tips, I'm realizing that they all kind of emphasize the importance of active engagement.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, whether it's like shadowing, taking notes, or even just asking yourself questions as you listen. It's about, going beyond just hearing the words. It's about really interacting with the language.
I like that. It's like the difference between, passively reading a textbook and actually teaching the material to someone else.
Totally.
That active engagement really helps it sink in.
Yeah, and what I also find interesting is that these tips kind of cater to different learning styles. You've got visual learners who might benefit from using subtitles, and then you've got like auditory learners who thrive on podcasts, and then kinesthetic learners who might find shadowing super helpful. It's like this episode provides a multi-pronged attack on the challenge of English listening.
And I love how it empowers the listener to choose, what works best for them.
Exactly. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Speaking of personalizing, remember that last tip we talked about, setting goals.
Yeah.
It can be really helpful to break those goals down into smaller steps.
Oh, totally. I think it's so easy to get overwhelmed by a big, ambitious goal like, I want to be fluent in English.
Right.
But if you break it down into smaller, more achievable milestones, it suddenly feels much less daunting.
Exactly. So instead of aiming to understand a whole movie without subtitles, maybe start with a 5-minute scene. Or instead of trying to listen to a podcast for an hour straight, maybe start with 10 minutes and gradually increase it.
Love that. Baby steps.
Exactly, baby steps. And then celebrate those little wins along the way.
Yeah, because those little victories are what keep us going, right?
Absolutely, they keep us motivated. Okay, so we've talked about setting realistic goals, celebrating those small wins. Now let's dive into some common challenges that people face when trying to improve their English listening comprehension. One obstacle that often comes up is the speed of native speakers.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It's perfectly normal, especially when you're first starting out. I mean, native speakers have had years and years of practice speaking and listening at their natural pace. It's understandable to feel a little overwhelmed.
It's true. It can feel like they're speaking a million miles a minute.
Right. Imagine expecting a beginner cyclist to keep up with a Tour de France rider.
Ooh. Yeah, that's a good visual.
It's not going to happen.
And it's easy to get discouraged when you feel like you're missing every other word.
Totally. But the key is to remember that speed is something that develops gradually with practice. It's about training your ear.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, remember those resources we talked about earlier, the ones that allow you to adjust the playback speed?
Yeah.
Those can be really helpful for slowly getting your ear accustomed to the natural rhythm of English.
So start slow, gradually increase the speed.
Exactly. And speaking of challenges, another one is dealing with different accents.
Oh, yes. We talked about that earlier. English has so many different accents around the world.
Right, and they can sound so different from each other.
The first time I heard someone with a thick Scottish accent, I was completely lost.
Oh, yeah, I understand. But the good news is, the more you expose yourself to those accents, the easier it becomes to decode them. And there's a certain satisfaction that comes with being able to understand all these different accents.
It's like you're unlocking a new level of listening comprehension.
Exactly. It's like becoming a citizen of the world, you know? You can communicate with people from all walks of life.
I love that.
And don't be shy about asking people to repeat themselves or to slow down if you're having trouble understanding. Most people are happy to accommodate.
That's good to know. I think sometimes we can feel a little embarrassed to ask for clarification, but it's important to remember that everyone starts somewhere. Speaking of things that can be challenging, let's talk about distractions. In today's world, it's so easy to get distracted while we're trying to listen to something.
Oh, yeah, tell me about it. Our phones are constantly buzzing, our thoughts are racing. It's hard to focus.
Our brains are wired to seek out novelty and stimulation. It's no wonder we find it hard to stay focused, especially when we're trying to listen in a foreign language.
Totally. And when our focus is divided, we're not really absorbing what we're hearing.
Exactly, which makes it harder to improve. So how do we create an environment that's more conducive to listening?
Well, one thing you can do is try to find a dedicated space for your English listening practice. Somewhere quiet, where you can minimize interruptions.
It's like creating a sanctuary for your mind.
Yeah, exactly. And put your phone on silent or even airplane mode. Close any unnecessary tabs on your computer, anything to minimize those distractions. And don't underestimate the power of good old-fashioned pen and paper.
The analog approach.
Taking notes can be incredibly helpful for staying focused and engaged. It forces you to actively process what you're hearing and identify those key points. Plus, you create this tangible record of your learning.
It's like you're building your own study guide. And you can get creative with it. Use different colors, diagrams, whatever helps you visualize and remember the information.
Absolutely. It's about making it your own.
Okay, so find a quiet space, minimize distractions, take notes. What else can we do to enhance our English listening experience?
Well, let's talk about vocabulary. A strong vocabulary is super important for understanding what you hear.
Oh, totally. I mean, vocabulary is like the building blocks of language.
Exactly. The more words you know, the easier it becomes to understand those subtle nuances of meaning. It's like having a wider palette of colors to paint with, You can create a richer, more detailed picture.
Ooh, I like that. And I think it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the thought of having to learn all these new words.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be a chore.
Right. And a lot of the techniques we've already talked about, like reading transcripts, watching movies, they naturally expose you to new vocabulary. And when you come across a word you don't know, don't be afraid to look it up. But don't just passively memorize the definition. Try to use it in your own speaking and writing. Make it an active part of your vocabulary.
It's about making those words your own. Okay, so we've talked about vocabulary. Now let's dive into another tricky area. Idioms and expressions.
Oh yeah, those can be tough.
They're like the little quirks of language that add color and personality, but they can also be so confusing. It's like everyone's speaking in code.
I like to think of them as like secret handshakes that native speakers use. They add depth and nuance to the language.
That's a good way to put it. And it's so satisfying when you finally understand an idiom or expression. It's like you've cracked the code.
Yeah.
But how do we get better at understanding them?
Well, one helpful tip is to keep a running list of the idioms and expressions you come across. Write down the meaning, maybe even an example sentence, so you can see how it's used in context. You can use flashcards, a notebook, even an app, whatever works for you.
So it's like you're building your own personal idiom dictionary.
Exactly. And as with vocabulary, try to use them in your own conversations. The more you use them, the more natural they'll become.
It's about putting those idioms and expressions into practice. Okay, so we've covered idioms and expressions. Now let's talk about cultural context, which I think is often overlooked in language learning.
Oh, absolutely. Cultural context is crucial.
It's like language is more than just words and grammar. It's also about understanding, the cultural norms, values, references that shape how people communicate.
Right. It's like trying to understand a joke without knowing anything about the culture it comes from. You might miss the punchline entirely.
Exactly.
And the same goes for English listening. If you're not familiar with the cultural context, you might misinterpret things. So how do we develop that cultural awareness alongside our listening skills?
That's a good question.
Well, I think one of the best ways is to immerse yourself in English-speaking cultures. Watch movies, read books, listen to music, follow social media accounts from those countries. It's like taking a virtual trip, You can absorb the sights, sounds, customs. Pay attention to how people interact, what topics they talk about, what values they express.
Soaking it all in.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to ask questions if you're unsure about something. Most people are happy to share their cultural perspectives. It's all part of the learning process.
Okay, so we're not just learning a language, we're learning about a culture. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about the emotional side of improving your English listening skills.
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
Because, let's be honest, language learning can be an emotional roller coaster.
Totally. There are moments of excitement, of frustration, of pride, even self-doubt.
I know, I've been there. I remember feeling so discouraged when I first started learning English. Like, I felt like I was never going to get it. But then I realized that those negative thoughts were actually holding me back.
Absolutely. If we let those negative thoughts take over, it can really sabotage our learning. It's like carrying a heavy weight around.
So, how do we stay positive and motivated, especially when things get tough?
Well, one helpful tip is to focus on the process rather than the outcome. Instead of obsessing over achieving fluency overnight, celebrate those small victories along the way. Acknowledge your progress, no matter how small it seems. Remember that mistakes are not failures, they're opportunities to learn.
It's like learning to ride a bike. You're going to fall a few times before you get it right.
Exactly. And just like you wouldn't give up on riding a bike after a few falls, don't give up on your English listening journey just because you hit a few breaks in the road.
I love that. Embrace the challenges and keep moving forward. Speaking of keeping things moving, let's talk about motivation.
Yes, motivation. Motivation is what fuels our learning, especially when things get tough.
It's the difference between, dragging yourself through a lesson and eagerly diving into a podcast.
And while motivation can come and go naturally, there are things we can do to cultivate it and keep it going.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Yeah.
What are your tips for staying motivated on this language learning journey?
Well, one helpful strategy is to connect your goals to your personal values and aspirations. Like, ask yourself, why am I learning English in the first place? How will this benefit my life? Do you want to travel the world? Connect with people from different cultures, advance your career. Whatever your reasons are, remind yourself of them regularly.
Yeah, I like that. It's like having a personal cheerleader reminding you why you started in the first place. It's easy to lose sight of that sometimes.
Exactly. And another powerful motivator is finding joy in the learning process itself.
Oh, I love that. It shouldn't feel like a chore.
Right. Experiment with the different resources, different methods. Find what makes you excited to learn. Maybe it's listening to podcasts about your hobbies, watching documentaries, even creating your own English language content. The key is to make it feel like an adventure, not an obligation.
That's so true. Okay, so connect with your why, find joy in the process. What else can we do to set ourselves up for success?
Well, it's important to set realistic expectations.
Okay, so be kind to yourself, basically.
Yeah, be kind to yourself and be patient. Remember that language learning takes time. You're not going to become fluent overnight.
So don't get discouraged if you don't understand everything right away.
Exactly. Focus on those small wins, acknowledge your progress, and enjoy the journey.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly. Right? It's a marathon.
Right, so be patient, be persistent, be kind to yourself. Anything else we should keep in mind?
Well, don't underestimate the power of feedback.
Oh, feedback is so important. It helps us know where we're at, where we need to improve, but how do we get that feedback?
Well, you could take English classes, work with a tutor.
Yeah, one-on-one instruction can be really helpful.
It can be, yeah. Or you could join language exchange groups or online communities. That way, you can practice with other learners and get feedback from native speakers.
Those are great options for real-world practice.
They are. And don't forget about self-assessment.
Self-assessment, how do you mean?
You can record yourself listening to something in English and then listen back to the recording. Pay attention to the areas where you struggled or made mistakes.
It's like watching game film to analyze your performance. I love that.
Exactly. And as you practice and get feedback, whether it's from others or from yourself, you'll start to develop a more attuned ear for English.
Okay, so get feedback, whether it's from a teacher, a language partner, or even yourself. Got it. So what else can we do to enhance our English listening practice?
Well, let's talk about technology. Technology can be a game changer for language learners. There are so many incredible resources available to us now.
It's true. We've got apps, dictionaries, podcasts, streaming services. It's amazing.
Right. It's like having a world of language learning at our fingertips. And one of the most powerful tools for listening is speech recognition software. Have you ever used that?
I've used it for dictation, but I haven't really explored its potential for language learning. How could it help?
Well, it's basically like having a personal transcriber. It can convert spoken English into written text in real time.
Wow.
So if you miss a word or a phrase, you can easily see it in the transcript. And a lot of these programs also offer feedback on your pronunciation, which can be super helpful.
I'm like having a virtual language coach. It's pretty cool.
And don't forget about online dictionaries and translation tools. They can be lifesavers when you come across a word or phrase you don't understand. And the best part is, technology is constantly evolving, so there are always new tools and resources emerging. So my advice is to embrace those tools.
Yeah, make technology work for you. Okay, so we've talked about technology, feedback, setting realistic expectations, staying motivated. It seems like there's one more really important ingredient for success.
And that is consistency.
Consistency, yes. I think that's key for anything we want to achieve in life, but especially for language learning. It's not about cramming, hours and hours of practice into one day. It's about making it a regular part of your routine.
Think of it like watering a plant. You wouldn't just drench it with water once a week and expect it to thrive. You'd give it small, consistent amounts of water every day.
Oh, that's such a good analogy.
Right. Consistency is key. Small, consistent actions over time produce much greater results than sporadic, intense effort.
So how do we make consistency a habit? How do we make it part of our daily routine?
Well, one helpful tip is to find those little pockets of time throughout your day where you can squeeze in a few minutes of practice. Maybe it's during your commute or while you're doing chores, or even just while you're relaxing in the evening. The key is to make it feel natural, like a part of your day, not a separate task.
It's about weaving English listening into the fabric of our lives. I like that.
And another helpful tip is to set realistic goals. Don't overwhelm yourself with something that's going to lead to burnout.
It's about setting ourselves up for success.
Exactly. Start with small goals and then gradually increase them as your skills and confidence grow. And don't forget to celebrate those little wins along the way.
Yes, those small victories are what keep us motivated. Okay, so be consistent, set realistic goals, celebrate the small wins. What else can we do to overcome the challenges of English listening?
Well, let's talk about a big one: fear of making mistakes.
Yes, the dreaded fear of making mistakes. It can be so paralyzing.
It can be. We worry about sounding silly, being judged.
It's like we have this inner critic that's constantly telling us we're not good enough.
Right. But the truth is, everyone makes mistakes, especially when learning a new language. It's a natural part of the process.
So how do we embrace those mistakes and not let them hold us back?
Well, it's about shifting our perspective. Instead of seeing mistakes as failures, see them as opportunities to learn and grow. Think about it this way. If you were learning to play a musical instrument, you wouldn't expect to play a perfect song on your first try.
True.
You'd start with simple exercises, scales, and you'd make a lot of mistakes along the way. But those mistakes wouldn't discourage you, they'd help you improve.
It's about seeing those mistakes as stepping stones. I love that.
And the same applies to English listening. Don't be afraid to experiment, to push yourself outside your comfort zone, even if it means making a few mistakes along the way.
It's all part of the learning process.
Exactly. So embrace the mistakes.
Okay, I'm embracing the mistakes. Now let's talk about how English listening connects to the other language skills, like speaking, reading, and writing.
Right. Language is like this interconnected web, all the skills work together and reinforce each other. It's like a symphony orchestra.
Okay, yeah, like that.
Each instrument plays its part, but together they create this beautiful, harmonious whole.
And improving one skill can have a ripple effect, helping the others to improve as well.
Exactly. So, for example, the more you listen to English, the more you'll naturally absorb those rhythms, intonations, and pronunciation patterns. And that can really help your speaking fluency.
So it's like our ears are getting trained, and that training influences how we speak.
Exactly. And the more you listen, the more you'll be exposed to new vocabulary and grammar, which can help your reading and writing skills too.
It's like cross-training for language learning.
I like that. Cross-training for language.
Okay, so we're seeing a theme emerge here. We've talked about the importance of patience, and now it seems like another key ingredient is emerging: persistence.
Absolutely. Persistence is essential, especially when it comes to language learning, which can be a long and winding road.
It's easy to get discouraged when we don't see those results right away.
It is. But it's important to remember that language learning is a gradual process. It takes time, effort, and consistent practice. Think of it like growing a garden. You plant the seeds, you nurture them, and then you patiently wait for them to sprout and blossom. You wouldn't expect to see a flower the day after you plant the seed, right?
No, of course not.
It takes time. And the same goes for English listening. Be patient, trust the process, and you'll eventually reap the rewards of your efforts.
Okay, patience and persistence.
Mm.
Got it.
Yeah.
So, what other challenges do we need to be aware of on this language learning journey?
Well, let's talk about accents and dialects.
Oh, yes. Accents and dialects are like the spice of language.
Exactly. They add flavor and richness to how English is spoken around the world. But they can also be challenging for language learners, especially when they're encountering unfamiliar pronunciations or vocabulary.
It's like discovering that there are all these hidden worlds within the English language.
Right. And navigating those worlds can be both exciting and daunting.
So how do we get better at understanding different accents and dialects?
Well, the key is exposure. Immerse yourself in a variety of accents. Seek out resources from different English-speaking regions. Listen to movies, TV shows, podcasts, music. It's like creating a playlist for your ears, a playlist of accents and dialects.
I love that.
And as you listen, pay attention to those unique pronunciation patterns, the vocabulary choices, the rhythm. You might notice that some speakers pronounce words differently, use different slang, or even have different grammatical structures. And don't be afraid to slow down the audio, use subtitles, or look up words you don't know.
It's like we have all these tools to help us decode the language.
Exactly. And as you become more familiar with different accents and dialects, you'll start to develop a more adaptable ear. You'll be able to understand English spoken in a wider range of contexts. It's like training your palate to appreciate different cuisines. The more you expose yourself to different flavors, the more discerning your taste buds become.
And the same applies to English listening. The more accents and dialects we're exposed to, the better our listening comprehension will become.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of embracing accents and dialects. Now let's address a common fear that many language learners have. What if I don't understand everything I hear?
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. And it's a perfectly valid concern. It's normal to feel overwhelmed, especially when you're first starting out.
I know I did. I felt like I was always missing something.
But here's the thing. You don't need to understand every single word to understand the overall meaning.
Oh, that's a relief to hear.
Think of it like looking at a painting. You don't need to analyze every brushstroke to appreciate the beauty of the painting as a whole, right?
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean.
In the same way, with English listening, you can focus on getting the main idea, the key information, the gist of the conversation. You don't need to sweat every single word.
So use the context to help you fill in the gaps.
Exactly. Use those context clues, your existing knowledge of English and your intuition to piece together the meaning. And remember, even native speakers don't catch every word in every conversation. We rely on context and inference to fill in those blanks.
That makes me feel a lot better. So don't get hung up on understanding every single word. Focus on the big picture and trust your ability to make sense of what you hear.
Exactly. Now, let's talk about something that's often overlooked in English listening: nonverbal communication.
Oh, yes. Body language, facial expressions, tone of voice, all that good stuff.
It's so important. Language is more than just words. It's a whole package. And those nonverbal cues can often convey as much meaning as the words themselves.
Sometimes even more.
Right. They can reveal emotions, attitudes, intentions, things that might not be explicitly stated. It's like learning to read between the lines.
Okay, so how do we tune in to those nonverbal cues? What should we be looking for?
Well, one thing to pay attention to is body language. Are they making eye contact? Are their arms crossed? Or are they open and relaxed? Are they leaning in or leaning back? These cues can give you clues about how engaged they are, how confident they feel, and what their emotional state might be.
So it's like they're speaking with their bodies as much as with their words.
Exactly. And facial expressions are another big one. A smile, a frown, a raised eyebrow. All these subtle movements can convey a lot of information.
It's like their faces are mirrors to their emotions.
And then there's tone of voice. Is the speaker speaking quickly or slowly? Loudly or softly? High-pitched or low-pitched? These variations can convey urgency, excitement, anger, sadness, all sorts of things.
It's like their voices are instruments, expressing all these different emotions.
Right. And lastly, be mindful of cultural norms around nonverbal communication. What might be considered polite in one culture might be considered rude in another. So do a little research or observe how people interact in different settings.
So it's not just about understanding the words, it's about understanding the cultural context as well.
Exactly. So as you practice your English listening, pay attention to those nonverbal cues, consider the cultural context, and use them to deepen your understanding.
It's like we're becoming detectives, piecing together all these clues to understand the complete message.
I like that. Language detectives.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about another common challenge: dealing with background noise.
Oh, background noise can be the worst. It's like trying to have a conversation at a crowded party. There's just so much going on.
And in real life, we're rarely in perfectly quiet environments. There's always some level of background noise, whether it's traffic, music, or just people talking.
So how do we train our ears to filter out those distractions?
Well, one thing you can do is gradually expose yourself to increasingly noisy environments. Start with relatively quiet settings, like listening at home, and then slowly progress to more challenging places, like coffee shops or public transportation. As you practice in those noisy environments, your brain will start to adapt.
So it's like a form of desensitization. We're getting our ears used to the noise.
Exactly. And another helpful tip is to use headphones. Headphones can really help to minimize distractions and create a more focused listening experience.
Okay, so gradually expose yourself to noise, use headphones. Any other tips?
Well, don't be afraid to ask people to repeat themselves if you don't understand something. Most people are happy to help, especially when they see you're making an effort.
That's good to know. It's a reminder that most people are pretty understanding. Okay, so we've talked about dealing with background noise. Now let's switch gears and talk about music. Music can be a powerful tool for improving our English listening skills.
Oh, absolutely. Music is a universal language, right?
I love that description. Music has a way of connecting with us on such a deep level.
It does, and it can be such a fun and engaging way to practice your listening skills.
So how can we use music effectively to improve our English?
Well, one tip is to choose songs with clear lyrics and a moderate tempo.
So not too fast, not too complicated.
Exactly. Start with something manageable, and then gradually increase the difficulty as your skills improve.
So start with the easy listening and then work your way up to like heavy metal.
Haha, exactly. And another helpful tip is to listen to songs while you're reading the lyrics. That way you can follow along and see how the words are pronounced.
Oh yeah, that's a classic technique. It's like a built-in karaoke session.
And don't just passively listen. Really engage with the lyrics. Try to understand the meaning of the song. Maybe even do some research on the artist or the cultural context.
So it's not just about listening, it's about understanding.
Right, and don't limit yourself to just one genre. Explore different styles of music. The more variety you have, the more well-rounded your listening practice will be.
It's like creating a musical smorgasbord for your ears. Okay, so choose songs with clear lyrics, listen while reading the lyrics, and explore different genres. Anything else?
And as you listen, pay attention to the singer's pronunciation, intonation, rhythm. Try to imitate them.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
It's like having a vocal coach right there in your headphones. And most importantly, have fun. Music is a wonderful tool for language learning, but it's also meant to be enjoyed. So put on your favorite tunes and let the music transport you to a world of English language and culture.
I love that. Now let's shift gears and talk about active listening techniques.
Okay, so active listening is about more than just passively hearing sounds. It's about really engaging with the material, processing the information, and extracting meaning.
It's about being present, being in the moment with the language.
Exactly, that's a conscious effort. So how do we become more active listeners?
That's a great question.
Well, one thing you can do is set a clear purpose for your listening. Before you start listening to a podcast or watching a movie, ask yourself, what do I want to get out of this? Do you want to learn new vocabulary? Do you want to understand a particular topic? Or do you just want to enjoy the story?
So it's about having a goal in mind.
Exactly. Having a purpose helps you focus your attention and makes the experience more meaningful.
Okay, set a purpose. What else can we do?
Well, another helpful technique is to take notes while you listen. Jot down keywords, phrases, ideas that stand out to you. It helps you stay engaged, it helps you remember what you've heard, and it can help you identify areas where you might need to focus more attention.
So it's about creating a roadmap of the information.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to pause, rewind, or even listen to sections multiple times. It's okay to take your time.
So take notes, pause, rewind, go at your own pace.
Got it. And another really effective technique is to ask yourself questions while you listen.
Like what kinds of questions?
Well, you could ask yourself, what is the speaker trying to say? Or what are the main points? Or how does this connect to what I already know?
Well, I like that. It's like you're having a conversation with the material.
Exactly. Asking questions helps you think critically about the information and deepen your understanding. And finally, don't be afraid to engage with the material beyond just listening. Look up unfamiliar words, research topics that interest you, or even discuss what you've learned with someone else. The more you interact with the material, the more you'll learn and remember.
So it's about taking your learning off the page and into the real world.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked about active listening techniques. Now let's talk about real-life practice.
Ah, yes. Putting those skills to the test.
While structured practice is important, nothing can truly replace the experience of interacting with real people in real time.
It's like the difference between practicing your tennis serve against a wall and playing a real match.
Exactly. It's in those real conversations that we can truly test our skills and build our confidence. So, how do? Well, one helpful approach is to choose songs with clear lyrics and a moderate tempo. Songs that are too fast or have overly complex lyrics can be overwhelming, especially when you're just starting out.
That makes sense. Start with something manageable.
Right. And as your listening skills improve, you can gradually challenge yourself with faster, more intricate songs.
So it's like a staircase, you know? You start at the bottom and work your way up.
Exactly. And another tip is to listen to songs with the lyrics in front of you. That way you can follow along, you can identify new vocabulary, and you can even practice singing along.
Oh, yeah. That's a fun way to practice.
It is, and it's a great way to improve your pronunciation, your vocabulary, even your grammar. And don't just passively listen. Really engage with the lyrics, try to understand the meaning, maybe even research the background of the song, the cultural context.
So it's like you're not just listening to the music, you're learning about the culture as well.
Exactly. And don't limit yourself to just one genre or artist. Explore different styles, different voices, different sounds.
The more variety, the better.
Exactly. And as you listen, pay attention to the singer's pronunciation, their intonation, their rhythm. Try to imitate them. It's like having a vocal coach right there in your pocket.
That's a great image.
And most importantly, have fun. Music is meant to be enjoyed. So put on your favorite English songs, relax, and let the music take you on a journey.
I love that. So we've talked about music. Now let's shift gears and talk about active listening techniques. We touched on this earlier, but I think it's worth diving a little deeper.
Okay, yeah, active listening is a crucial skill for anyone learning a language. It's about more than just passively hearing the sounds. It's about actively engaging with the material, processing the information and making meaning.
So what are some specific techniques we can use to become more active listeners?
Well, one thing you can do is set a clear purpose for your listening. Before you start listening to something, ask yourself, what do I want to get out of this? What's my goal? Do I want to learn new vocabulary? Do I want to understand a particular topic? Or do I just want to enjoy the story?
So have a goal in mind.
Exactly. Having a purpose gives you focus. And another helpful strategy is to take notes while you listen. Jot down keywords, phrases, ideas that stand out.
Okay, so take notes.
Right. It helps you stay engaged, and it creates a record of your learning. And don't be afraid to pause, rewind, or listen to sections multiple times. It's okay to take your time and really process the information.
So take notes, pause, rewind, go at your own pace.
Exactly. And another great technique is to ask yourself questions while you're listening, like, what is the speaker trying to say? Or what are the main points? Or how does this connect to what I already know? It's like having a conversation with the material.
That's a great way to put it.
And finally, don't be afraid to engage with the material beyond just listening. Look up unfamiliar words, research topics that interest you, or discuss what you've learned with someone else. The more you interact with the material, the more you'll learn and remember.
So take your learning off the page and into the real world.
Exactly.
Okay.
So we've talked about active listening. Now let's talk about something that's really important for taking your listening skills to the next level. Real life practice.
Ah, yes. Putting those skills to the test.
While structured practice is important, nothing can truly replace the experience of interacting with real people in real time. It's like the difference between practicing your tennis serve against a wall and playing a real match. You need that real-world experience to truly test your skills and build your confidence.
So how do we find those opportunities for real-life practice?
Well, one option is to join a language exchange group or an online community where you can connect with native English speakers who are learning your language. It's a win-win situation. You get to practice your English, and you get to help someone else learn your language.
I love that. It's mutually beneficial.
Exactly. And another option is to attend events or activities where English is spoken. Maybe it's a meetup, a workshop, a cultural event, anything like that.
Soak up the language.
Exactly. And if you have the opportunity, travel to an English-speaking country. Immersing yourself in the language and culture is one of the most effective ways to accelerate your learning.
It's like taking your learning to the next level. You're not just studying the language, you're living it.
Exactly. And don't be shy about striking up conversations with native speakers, even if you're feeling nervous. Most people are happy to help, and they appreciate the effort you're making.
Okay, so be brave, put yourself out there, and practice, practice, practice.
Exactly. And remember, every conversation is a learning opportunity, whether it goes perfectly or not.
I love that. It's all about the journey. Well, we've covered so much ground today. We've talked about everything from choosing the right resources to setting goals to embracing mistakes. I'm feeling really inspired and motivated.
Me too. It's been a great conversation.
And I think the key takeaway is that improving your English listening skills is a journey. And it's a journey that's unique to each individual. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. It's about finding what works best for you, being consistent, and enjoying the process.
Absolutely. And remember, the most important ingredient is you. Your passion, your dedication, and your unique perspective are what will ultimately guide you to success.
So well said. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and expertise with us today. It's been a real pleasure exploring these strategies with you.
The pleasure was all mine. And to everyone listening, keep exploring the wonderful world of the English language and never stop learning.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us and happy listening.